Detective Maria Karras thought it was just another routine archive review. It was October 2023, and the Oregon State Police had recently absorbed the files of the struggling Pinecrest Municipal Department, a small Willamette Valley town that had finally unincorporated its local police force. Karras, a detective with the OSP Cold Case Unit, had drawn the short straw. Sorting through decades of poorly organized, water-damaged, and often irrelevant case files stored in the damp, cinder-block basement of the old town hall. The air smelled of mildew and forgotten paperwork, a thick, sweet rot that clung to her clothes. The fluorescent lights hummed unevenly, casting a sickly yellow pall over the towering metal shelves. She was assigned to digitize and assess, a euphemism for finding anything worth saving and shredding the rest. Most of it was noise, petty theft from the 70s, DUI reports from the 80s, domestic disputes from the 90s. She picked up another banker's box, the cardboard soft and yielding. The label, written in faded blue ballpoint pen, read, State v. Hendershot, 1981, DUI POS. It was a nothing case, a routine drunk driving arrest from over 40 years ago. But departmental policy was policy. She had to inventory every piece of physical evidence before approving the file for destruction. She sliced the brittle packing tape and lifted the lid. Inside was a typical collection of artifacts from a forgotten night, a sealed manila envelope containing the breathalyzer report, a photograph of a dented Ford pickup, and at the bottom a small zip-top plastic baggie. The baggie itself was yellowed and stiff, the plastic cracking at the corners. Inside, nestled on a bed of graying cotton, was a small tarnished silver locket, heart-shaped, with a single delicately etched rose on the front. Karras frowned. This was not typical for a DUI case. She put on a pair of nitrile gloves and carefully lifted the bag. The evidence tag attached to the zipper was almost illegible. She squinted under the poor light. Item number 4. Found ground. Approx. 10 YDs from vehicle. Hendershot. An officer must have found it during the vehicle inventory or the tow-in, assumed it belonged to the drunk driver, and bagged it. It was sloppy, but not surprising for 1981. She was about to place it back in the box, a forgotten trinket from a forgotten night, when something in her peripheral vision caught her eye. On the shelf above the Hendershot box was a much thicker, heavier box. Its label was stark. Jenkins, Sarah E., H&M, Seuss P., 1981. Homicide and missing. Karras froze. She knew that name. Everyone who worked cold cases in the valley knew that name. Sarah Jenkins was Pinecrest's ghost, the 19-year-old girl who vanished from the diner where she worked, her car left in the lot, her paycheck never picked up. A 42-year-old mystery. Karras looked from the locket in her hand to the Jenkins file. The Hendershot DUI arrest had occurred on the exact same night Sarah Jenkins disappeared, less than half a mile from the diner. A chill, entirely separate from the basement's dampness, crept up her spine. She pulled down the heavy Jenkins box, blew a cloud of dust from its lid, and opened it. She scanned the initial intake report, the list of personal effects Sarah was reportedly wearing: white blouse, blue jeans, and a silver locket, heart-shaped, grandmother's. Karras looked at the item in her hand. This wasn't Hendershot's locket. This was Sarah's. After 42 years, a critical piece of evidence had been sitting in the wrong box, mistaken for roadside litter from a drunk driver waiting in the dark. The ghost of Sarah Jenkins, trapped in the mildewed basement, had just started to speak. May 14th, 1981. Pinecrest, Oregon, was saturated in the heavy, vibrant green of a valley spring. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and blossoming rhododendrons, a sweetness that usually lifted the spirits of the small logging and farming community. For Sarah Elizabeth Jenkins, 19, the smell was simply the backdrop to her shift. She was pulling a double at the Willow Creek Diner, a classic mid-century spot on the edge of town where Route 22 began its climb toward the Cascades. The diner was a comfortable prison of formica tables, cracking vinyl booths, and the persistent smell of hot coffee and frying onions. Sarah moved through it with an efficiency that belied her exhaustion. She was saving every dollar, every tip hastily shoved into the pocket of her powder blue uniform for her escape. In 3 months, she would be moving to Portland to start classes at Portland State University. It was all she talked about. "You're dreaming again, Sarah," teased Marge, the head waitress, as Sarah stared out the window, watching a logging truck rumble past. Sarah just smiled, refilling a sugar dispenser. Her younger brother, Liam, 14 and gangly, skidded his bicycle to a stop outside, leaning it against the diner's window. He came in, ignoring the employees-only sign, and slumped into a booth, demanding a free slice of cherry pie. "Get out, Liam," Sarah sighed, swatting him with her towel. "Mum told you not to bother me at work." "I'm not bothering. I'm hungry," he whined, picking at a loose thread on the vinyl seat. "And Mom wanted to know if you're driving to the mill pond tonight or if Debbie is picking you up." "Debbie's picking me up. My shift ends at 9. Now go." "Fine." He paused, his eyes landing on the thin silver chain around her neck. "What's that?" He reached for it, and Sarah instinctively covered it with her hand. "Stop. You'll break it." She pulled it out from under her collar. It was a small heart-shaped locket, polished bright. "Grandma Jenkins gave it to me, for graduation, and for Portland." "It's old," Liam said, unimpressed. "It's an antique," Sarah corrected, her fingers tracing the etched rose on its surface. "It means good luck." She tucked it back beneath her uniform, a secret promise against her skin. "Now, seriously, get out of here. Mr. Henderson is looking." Liam grabbed a handful of crackers from a basket and bolted for the door, yelling, "See you later." Sarah watched him pedal furiously down the street, a momentary wave of affection softening her features. She turned back to her tables, the clatter of plates and the sizzle of the grill pulling her back into the rhythm of the evening. She refilled coffees, laughed with the regulars from the sawmill and counted the hours. At 8:52 p.m. she cashed out her last table. At 8:57 p.m. she hung up her apron. At 9:01 p.m. she waved goodnight to Mr. Henderson, the owner, who was wiping down the grill. "Have fun with Debbie, Sarah," he called. "Don't stay out too late." "I won't," she called back. The bell on the diner door jingling as she pushed it open. She stepped out into the cool, damp air of the Oregon twilight. The sky was a deep, bruised purple, and the neon "Eat" sign of the diner cast a pinkish glow over the empty parking lot. Her 1974 Toyota Celica sat waiting. She walked toward it, fishing her keys from her pocket, the silver locket resting securely under her shirt. The Mill Pond Park was only a mile from the diner, a popular gathering spot for the teenagers of Pinecrest. A wide, grassy expanse surrounded a placid pond that had once fed the town's original lumber mill. On that Thursday night, Debbie Carmichael sat on the hood of her parents' Ford Granada, waiting, The air was cooling quickly, the dampness seeping into her jeans. She and Sarah were supposed to meet, then drive into Salem to see a movie, a rare weeknight indulgence. Debbie checked her Timex watch. 9:15 p.m. Sarah was never late. If anything, she was chronically early, always buzzing with an energy Debbie envied. Perhaps a customer had stayed late, or Mr. Henderson had asked her to help close up. Debbie turned on the car radio, the tinny sound of Hall & Oates drifting into the twilight. 9:30 p.m. The park was emptying. The damp air was growing colder, carrying the sharp scent of pine from the surrounding woods. Debbie slid off the hood and walked to the edge of the pond, skipping a rock across its dark, glassy surface. This was strange. In 1981, there were no cell phones to send a quick text. There was only waiting. 9:45 p.m. Now, genuine annoyance was giving way to a small, gnawing unease. Sarah was meticulous. If she were this late, she would have used the diner's payphone to call Debbie's house before she left. Debbie got back in the Granada and drove the short distance back to the Willow Creek Diner. The parking lot was empty, save for one car parked near the back under the flickering security light. Sarah's pale blue Celica. Debbie parked beside it. She peered into the window. The car was locked. Sarah's jean jacket, the one she always wore, was tossed on the passenger seat. But Sarah was gone. Debbie looked around the empty lot. The diner was dark, the neon sign switched off. The only sounds were the distant rumble of a truck on the highway and the clicking of the cooling engine of Debbie's car. "Sarah!" she called out, her voice sounding small and thin. Maybe she'd walked home. But why? Her house was over 2 miles away, and her car was right here. Maybe she got a ride with someone else and forgot to tell Debbie. That wasn't like her. Debbie drove to the Jenkins house, a small, neat rambler on Maple Street. The lights were on. She knocked, and Liam, now in his pajamas, answered. "Is Sarah here?" Debbie asked, trying to keep the worry from her voice. "No," Liam said, confused. "She's with you at the movie." "She never showed up, Liam." The unease that had started in the park crystallized instantly into something sharp and cold. "Her car is still at the diner." Liam's face went pale. "Mom! Dad!" he yelled, turning from the door. "Something's wrong with Sarah." Within minutes, the comfortable quiet of the Jenkins home shattered. June Jenkins, Sarah's mother, gripped the kitchen counter, her knuckles white, as her husband, Arthur, grabbed his keys. "She's probably fine," Arthur said, his voice tight with a forced calm that convinced no one. "Maybe her car battery died, and she's waiting at the diner. Maybe Henderson is still there." But they all knew Henderson closed at 9, sharp. Liam, his heart pounding with a sudden inexplicable dread, jumped into the back of the family station wagon. The drive to the diner, usually less than 5 minutes, felt agonizingly slow. The streets of Pinecrest were silent, the town settling in for the night. When they pulled into the parking lot, the sight of Sarah's Celica sitting alone under the buzzing yellow light confirmed Debbie's story. It was an island of stillness in the vast, empty lot. Arthur parked haphazardly and was out of the car before the engine was off. He strode over to the Celica and cupped his hands against the glass, peering inside, as if expecting Sarah to be curled up asleep in the back seat. He saw only her jacket. He yanked on the lock door handle, a useless, angry gesture. "Sarah!" he bellowed, his voice echoing off the dark brick of the diner. The sound was swallowed by the night. June and Liam got out of the car more slowly. June walked the perimeter of the diner, peering into the dark windows, her hand pressed to her mouth. Liam just stared at the car. He felt fundamentally wrong, as if the world had tilted sideways. Sarah's car was Sarah. She loved that car. She would never, ever just leave it. "She's not here, Art," June said, her voice trembling. "Where is she?" Arthur ran to the payphone on the side of the diner wall, the one Sarah would have used to call Debbie. He fumbled a quarter from his pocket, his hands shaking, and dialed the Pinecrest Police Department. "My daughter," he said, his voice cracking with the effort of staying coherent. "My daughter is missing. Sarah Jenkins. We're at the Willow Creek Diner. Her car is here, but she's gone." The dispatcher's voice on the other end was calm, procedural. The contrast between the operator's bureaucratic tone and the raw panic exploding in Arthur's chest was jarring. "How long has she been missing, sir?" "I don't know. An hour, 2 hours? She got off work at 9. She never met her friend. She's just gone." Liam, standing by the station wagon, looked past the diner, past the edge of the asphalt, into the dense black wall of Douglas firs that bordered the property. The woods seemed to have grown darker, more menacing, as if they had leaned in closer while no one was watching. He thought of the locket she had shown him just hours before, the one for good luck. The panic that had been simmering in his stomach turned into a cold, hard stone of terror. His sister was gone. The first 24 hours were a blur of flashing lights, methodical questions, and a creeping, acidic exhaustion. The Pinecrest Police Department, consisting of Chief Dale Miller and his 4 deputies, responded quickly, arriving at the diner within 10 minutes of Arthur's call. Chief Miller, a broad, pragmatic man who had known the Jenkins family for 20 years, initially treated it as a possible runaway situation. 19-year-old girls, Art, he said gently, placing a heavy hand on Arthur's shoulder. Sometimes they just get an idea in their head. A boy, maybe. She'll turn up tomorrow with a story, embarrassed. Not Sarah, June insisted, her voice thin and reedy in the cold night air. She wouldn't do this. She was saving for Portland. She wouldn't leave her car. She wouldn't leave her paycheck. The mention of the paycheck, still sitting in Mr. Henderson's office, gave Miller pause. That was strange. He assigned Deputy Alvarez to stay with the car and called in his night shift officers. They began with flashlights fanning out from the parking lot. Their beams cut weak cones into the oppressive darkness of the surrounding woods. They searched the drainage ditch that ran alongside Route 22. They searched the dumpster behind the diner. They found nothing. No sign of a struggle. No dropped purse. No broken glass. Just the locked Celica and the cooling night air. By 3:00 a.m., the Jenkins family was back home, the police having insisted there was nothing more to be done in the dark. No one slept. June sat at the kitchen table, staring at the phone, willing it to ring. Arthur paced the living room, his face grey with fatigue and fear. Liam sat on the stairs, listening to the muffled sobs of his mother and the heavy, angry footsteps of his father. He felt a suffocating guilt. The last thing he had done was bother her, demanding pie. He wished desperately he could go back to tell her something, to stop her. As dawn broke on May 15th, the search escalated. Chief Miller, now convinced this was not a runaway, organized a full-scale ground search. Volunteers from the sawmill, high school students, and concerned neighbors gathered in the diner's parking lot, which had transformed from a scene of potential abandonment into an active command post. Maps were spread across the hoods of patrol cars. K9 units were brought in from the county sheriff's office. The dogs, whining with anticipation, were given Sarah's uniform provided by Mr. Henderson to catch her scent. They tracked her path from the diner's back door across the asphalt to the edge of the parking lot where her car was parked, and then, at the curb where the lot met the main road, the scent vanished, utterly. The dogs sniffed the air, confused, circled, and returned to their handlers. The implication was chilling. She hadn't walked into the woods, she hadn't walked home, she had reached the edge of the road, and then she was gone. She had gotten into a car, whether by force or by choice, no one knew. The first week was a slow-motion catastrophe, a descent from frantic hope into a dull, throbbing dread. By the third day, Sarah's disappearance was front-page news in the Pinecrest Gazette and a 30-second story on the Portland Evening News. The image of Sarah, taken from her high school graduation photo the year before, was suddenly everywhere. She was smiling, her eyes bright with a future she was supposed to be running toward, not from. The photo was taped to the window of the post office, the grocery store, and stapled to telephone poles, the ink starting to run in the persistent Oregon drizzle. The town mobilized. Search parties, though less organized now, continued to scour the logging roads and clear cuts in the hills outside of town. The police, led by Chief Miller and his lead investigator, Detective Frank Gable, set up a tip line. It was immediately inundated. The calls were a deluge of well-meaning but useless information. A waitress in Eugene swore she saw Sarah at a truck stop. A truck driver reported picking up a girl, matching her description heading south on I-5, but he dropped her off in Medford. A local psychic called the station, claiming she had a vision of Sarah near running water and a broken tree. Each lead was meticulously logged by Gable, and each lead evaporated upon investigation. The girl in Eugene was a different brunette. The trucker, when shown a photo, admitted he wasn't sure. The running water described half of the Willamette Valley. For the Jenkins family, the week was an agonizing education in public grief. Their home, once a private sanctuary, became a public space, filled with neighbors bringing casseroles, friends of Sarah's weeping on the sofa, and the constant grim presence of Detective Gable, asking the same questions over and over. Was she seeing anyone secretly? Were there any problems at home? Did she ever mention wanting to leave? "No, no, no," June repeated, her voice raw. She was happy. She was excited about school. Liam, quiet and ghost-like, listened from the hallway. He felt the suspicion in Gable's questions. They didn't believe them. They thought Sarah had run off, that the family was hiding something. He grew quiet, retreating into a shell of adolescent anger and profound sadness. He stopped sleeping in his room and started sleeping on the floor of Sarah's room, surrounded by her things, her books, her records, the faint scent of her shampoo on the pillowcase. He was guarding it, waiting for her to return. By May 21st, exactly 1 week after she vanished, the atmosphere had changed. The frantic energy was gone, replaced by a heavy silence. The search parties had stopped. The news crews had packed up and moved on to the next story. The posters on the telephone poles were sagging, their edges flapping in the wind. The last K9 unit had gone home. Hope had not died, but it was critically wounded, fading with every silent ring of the telephone. The realization settled over the Jenkins family like a physical shroud. Sarah was not just late. She was not lost. she was gone. Detective Frank Gable was a man of routines. He liked his coffee black, his paperwork filed in triplicate, and his cases solvable. Sarah Jenkins's disappearance bothered him. It defied routine. It was clean, too clean. There was no physical evidence at the scene, no blood, no fibers, no tire tracks that didn't belong. There was only an absence. Gable set up his investigation in a borrowed office at the Pine Crest Town Hall. The walls quickly covered with a timeline, a map of the area, and Sarah's graduation photo, which stared at him as he worked. He began, as all investigations do, with the victimology. He needed to build a picture of Sarah Jenkins that was separate from the grieving, perfect daughter described by her parents. He interviewed Debbie Carmichael, who described Sarah as driven and responsible, but also fun. She wouldn't have gotten in a car with a stranger, Debbie insisted. She was the designated driver type, you know, the responsible one. What about a non-stranger? Gable pressed. A secret boyfriend? Someone from school? Debbie hesitated. She didn't really date. Not seriously. She said it was a distraction from her Portland fund. Gable moved on to the diner. Mr. Henderson was distraught, treating Sarah's disappearance as a personal failure of protection. He provided the names of all the employees and the regulars, in the half-dozen locals who were there every night. Gable and his deputies spent days interviewing them. They were all dead ends. They'd seen Sarah working, they'd seen her laugh, and then they'd seen her leave. The timeline was concrete up to 9:01 p.m., the window of her abduction, and Gable was now convinced it was an abduction, was terrifyingly small. Then, on the fourth day of the investigation, Gable interviewed Owen "Red" McKinley, the guidance counselor at Pine Crest High School. McKinley was a pillar of the community, a universally liked man in his mid-30s, known for his warm demeanor and his tireless work with the students. He had volunteered for the search parties. He approached Gable himself. "Detective," McKinley said, his face etched with concern. I think I saw Sarah that night." Gable's full attention snapped to him. "Where? When?" "It was just after 9. I was driving home from a school board meeting," McKinley explained, his voice steady and helpful. "I saw her walking along the shoulder of Route 22, just east of the diner, heading away from town toward the highway interchange." "Walking?" Gable asked, surprised. "Her car was at the diner. Why would she be walking?" "I thought the same," McKinley said, nodding. "She was walking briskly. I slowed down, rolled down my window. I was driving my old pickup, and asked if she needed a ride. She just waved me off, smiled, and said, 'I'm meeting someone, Mr. McKinley. I'm fine.' She seemed happy, excited even." Gable scribbled furiously in his notebook. "Did you see who she was meeting? Another car?" "No," McKinley said, shaking his head. "I just saw her walking. I figured it was one of her friends. I didn't think anything of it until I heard she was missing." This testimony changed everything. It shifted the entire focus of the investigation. Sarah wasn't taken from the parking lot. She had left the parking lot, walking willingly to a rendezvous. The canines losing the scent at the road suddenly made sense. She had gotten into a car, but one she was expecting. McKinley's statement created a new phantom suspect. The secret boyfriend, the unknown driver, the someone she was meeting. Gable, trusting the word of the town's most reliable witness, pivoted the entire investigation to find this mystery man. The lead, which had seemed so promising, was a ghost. Detective Gable and his team spent weeks trying to find the mystery man Owen McKinley had described. They re-interviewed all of Sarah's friends, digging deep into her private life. They checked her bank account. The money she'd saved for Portland was untouched. They checked her room, reading her diary, which was filled with adolescent frustrations and dreams of college, but contained no mention of a secret romance. The man McKinley saw her walking to meet simply did not seem to exist. As the investigation stretched from weeks into months, the lack of progress weighed heavily on Gable. The case file grew thick with interviews, polygraph results. McKinley passed his results showing no deception, and maps of the search areas, but there was no body, no weapon, and no suspect. The intense media pressure from Portland faded, replaced by coverage of the eruption of Mount St. Helens and the upcoming recession. Pinecrest, too, began to move on, the urgency replaced by a quiet collective grief that was slowly hardening into a local legend. The Jenkins case became the town's tragedy. Chief Miller, facing pressure from the town council to manage his budget, had to pull Gable onto newer, more solvable cases, a string of burglaries, an armed robbery at the lumber mill. The Sarah Jenkins file was not officially closed, but it was moved from Gable's active desk to the filing cabinet against the wall. By 1983, Frank Gable had retired, moving to Arizona to escape the incessant Oregon rain and the ghosts of his unsolved cases. The file box, labeled Jenkins S.E., was transferred to the county archives, a heavy cardboard tombstone. The investigation had failed. The primary error, though no one knew it, was buried in the premise. They were looking for a stranger, an unknown lover, based on the confident, compassionate, and entirely false testimony of Owen McKinley. His story, delivered with such sincerity, had sent the police on a phantom chase, directing their focus away from the diner's parking lot and away from him. The search for the mystery man was a fatal misdirection. The case went cold, not because of a lack of clues, but because the most important clue had been presented as a helpful observation by the killer himself. The locket, meanwhile, sat in the wrong evidence box, mislabeled and forgotten, just one shelf away. The truth lay dormant, waiting, while the town, the police, and the Jenkins family were left with nothing but an agonizing, unanswered question. Time, which had seemed to stop in May 1981, began to move again, but it moved cruelly. It moved forward for the world, but for the Jenkins family, it simply piled up, like layers of dust on Sarah's untouched bedroom. The 1980s unfolded. The Willow Creek Diner, unable to shake the shadow of the disappearance, saw its business dwindle. Mr. Henderson sold it in 1985. It became a failed taqueria, then a boarded-up shell, and was finally torn down in 1989 to make way for a generic strip mall with a video rental store and a dry cleaner. The physical landmark of Sarah's last known location was paved over, erased. Arthur Jenkins, who had been a robust man, seemed to shrink. He lost his job at the sawmill during the 1982 recession and never fully recovered. He would sit in his armchair for hours, staring out the window as if expecting to see Sarah's Celica pull into the driveway. His health declined rapidly, his heart broken by the stress and the unknowing. He died of a massive coronary in 1994, never learning what happened to his daughter. June Jenkins, now alone, held on. She kept Sarah's room exactly as it had been, a perfect shrine to 1981. The posters of Sean Cassidy and the cars on the wall, the textbooks on the desk, the faint smell of strawberry shampoo in the carpet. She would go in, sit on the bed, and quietly fold and refold the clothes in Sarah's drawers. In 2005, her memory began to blur, the edges of her grief softened by the onset of dementia. She was moved to an assisted living facility in Salem. In her moments of lucidity, she would ask Liam, "Is Sarah coming home from her shift soon?" Liam, by then a man in his late 30s, would just hold her hand and say, "Soon, Mom." The town of Pinecrest changed too. The logging industry faltered, and the town slowly transformed into a bedroom community for commuters working in Salem or Portland. New families moved in, building houses on the very land that had been searched by volunteers. These new residents knew of the story only as a vague, sad tale from the old days. Sarah Jenkins became a name on a plaque in the local cemetery, a cenotaph erected by her mother, bearing the inscription, "Lost but never forgotten." Life had moved on, stretching over the wound, but the grief underneath remained raw and infected, the absence as profound as it had been on the first day. For Liam Jenkins, there was no moving on. The disappearance of his sister was not a past event. It was the defining, continuous reality of his life. The 14-year-old boy who had slept on her floor, guarding her room, became a man obsessed. He left Pinecrest the day after he graduated high school in 1985, unable to breathe the same air as the people who had, in his mind, forgotten his sister. He moved to Seattle, put himself through college, and eventually became a private investigator. On the surface, he was successful. He specialized in insurance fraud and background checks, dull, meticulous work that paid the bills. But his real work, his only work, began at night. His small apartment in the University District was not a home. It was a cold case office. One entire wall was a corkboard, a replica of the one Detective Gable had used, covered in maps of Pinecrest, timelines and photographs. He had photographs of everyone, Debbie Carmichael, Mr. Henderson, the diner regulars, and, in the very center, a photo of Owen Red McKinley. Liam had never trusted McKinley. He was too smooth, too helpful. His story about Sarah walking to meet someone had always felt wrong to Liam. It felt like a story, crafted to absolve the town, to make the tragedy something Sarah had brought upon herself by meeting a secret lover. Liam spent years filing Freedom of Information Act requests, battling the county and the state until they finally released the complete, heavily redacted case file in 1998. He pored over the documents, memorizing every word. He saw the focus shift after McKinley's testimony and cursed the 1981 police force for their gullibility. He created databases of drifters and transients who had passed through Oregon in 1981. He cross-referenced missing persons cases from neighboring states. He became an expert in the forensics of the 1980s, learning what the police should have done, what fibers they missed, what parts of the car they failed to dust for prints. His obsession was a quiet, cold, burning engine. Every year, on May 14th, he would drive from Seattle to Pinecrest. He would park at the strip mall, staring at the spot where the diner used to be, trying to feel what had happened. Then he would visit his mother, holding her hand as she drifted in and out of memories. And finally, he would drive past Owen McKinley's house. McKinley was still there, a beloved local figure, retired now, who wrote a folksy history column for the Pinecrest Gazette. Liam would just watch, his hatred a solid, physical thing, before driving back to Seattle as the sun came up. In 2023, 42 years had passed. Liam was 56 years old. His hair was graying at the temples. His obsession had cost him relationships, cost him peace, but it had never wavered. Grief, when it lasts for decades, cannot sustain its initial raw intensity. It must change, or it will destroy the person who carries it. For Liam Jenkins, the sharp, agonizing pain of 1981 had over 40 years cooled and hardened into something else. Purpose. The realization came to him slowly, sometime in the late 2000s. He was reviewing his files on Sarah for the 1,000th time, the papers brittle and yellow, and he suddenly understood that he might never find her. The anger and anhedonia that had defined his adult life had brought him no closer, but his skills, his ability to navigate bureaucracy, to read police files, to find people who didn't want to be found, were real. He couldn't save Sarah, but he could, perhaps, find someone else. In 2011, he launched a website, a stark, simple blog called Oregon's Emptiness. He started by uploading all his research on Sarah's case, every document, every theory, every map. Then he added another case, a young man who vanished from Bend in 1989. Then another, a mother of two, who disappeared from Astoria in 1995. He used his PI skills to reinvestigate these cold cases, posting his findings, interviewing forgotten witnesses, and petitioning local police departments to reopen the files. The website and the podcast he later launched under the same name gained a small but fiercely loyal following. He became a reluctant voice for the families of the missing. He understood them in a way no one else could. He knew the specific exhaustion of a decades-long search. He knew the frustration of dealing with polite but dismissive detectives. He knew what it was to live with a ghost. This new work did not lessen his obsession with Sarah's case, but it gave it shape. He was no longer just a grieving brother trapped in 1981. He was an advocate, a skilled investigator, using his own tragedy as fuel. He found a grim community of people who, like him, lived in the shadow of an absence. He taught them how to file FOIA requests. He advised them on how to talk to the media. He gave them the solace of being truly heard. His pain, once a suffocating void, had become a tool, a light he could shine into the darkness for others. He was still waiting for a breakthrough for Sarah, but he was no longer just waiting. He was working. The breakthrough for Liam did not come from his own meticulous files, but from a connection he made through his podcast. In 2022, he interviewed Tom Alvarez, a retired deputy from the Pinecrest Department. Alvarez had been a rookie in 1981, just 23 years old, and had been one of the first officers on the scene at the Willow Creek Diner. He was now in his 60s, and like many retired cops, he was haunted by the cases that got away. He agreed to speak with Liam, man to man. They met at a coffee shop in Salem. Alvarez was quiet, thoughtful, his memory still sharp. "The thing that always bothered me, Liam," Alvarez said, stirring his coffee, "was McKinley. His story was just too neat. It closed the loop too perfectly." "I've been saying that for 40 years, Liam said, his voice tight. "But he passed a polygraph. Gable trusted him." "Gable was a good cop, but he liked easy answers," Alvarez said. "And McKinley was Pinecrest. But here's the detail that stuck with me. You can check the file. McKinley said he saw Sarah walking east on Route 22 toward the I-5 interchange. Makes sense if you're meeting someone from out of town." "So?" Liam asked. "So," Alvarez said, leaning in, "I was the one who processed her car, the Celica. It was parked in the back row of the lot, and it was parked facing west, toward town, toward her home. Her keys were in her pocket, we assume. So if she's walking to meet someone east of the diner, why would she walk all the way back to her car just to walk past it again, adding half a mile to her walk? It makes no sense. If you're leaving your car, you walk from the diner door directly to the road. You don't go to your car first. Liam sat bolt upright. He had read the file 1,000 times, but he had never connected those two specific details. The geography was wrong. She would have had to walk away from her car, then turn around and walk back past it, Liam whispered, visualizing the map he knew by heart. Exactly, Alvarez said. It's a small thing. It's not evidence. But it's a lie. Or at least a detail that doesn't fit the story McKinley told. He said he saw her on the road. I think whatever happened right there in that parking lot, right by her car. And if that's true, then McKinley's story isn't just a helpful witness account. It's active misdirection. The conversation lit a fire in Liam. It was the first new thread, the first plausible crack in the official narrative in decades. He began to reinvestigate McKinley from the ground up, focusing not on the man's reputation, but on his movements in 1981. He didn't know it yet, but across the state in another archive, a detective was about to find the piece of physical evidence that would connect his theory to the truth. October 2023. Detective Maria Karras stood in the cold basement archive, the small, tarnished locket heavy in her gloved palm. The connection was undeniable. The Hendershot DUI arrest and the Jenkins disappearance occurred on the same night, in the same small area. The officer processing the Hendershot scene, Deputy Alvarez, had conducted a cursory search of the diner area earlier in the night. He must have found the locket by the roadside, assumed it belonged to the drunk driver he was currently arresting, and simply put it in the wrong evidence bag. It was a simple, catastrophic filing error. Karras carried the two boxes, Jenkins and Hendershot, upstairs to her bright modern office at the OSP Annex. The contrast was stark. She documented the chain of custody, her mind racing. This locket was the first new piece of physical evidence in the case in 42 years. It had been sitting in the dark, a silent witness, just yards from the main case file. Karras immediately sent the locket, still in its cracked 1981 baggie, to the OSP Forensic Laboratory in Portland. She marked the submission Rush and Cold Case Homicide. The lab technicians, accustomed to Karras's meticulousness, moved it to the front of the queue. They knew that old evidence was delicate. The challenge would be finding DNA that hadn't degraded. The lab supervisor called Karras 3 days later. "Maria, you were right to send this," the supervisor said, her voice clipped and professional. The locket itself was wiped clean on the outside, or just worn smooth. But the clasp. People forget the clasp. We managed to unlatch it. It was protected from the elements. We found trace biological material inside. Karras held her breath. Whose? We got 2 profiles. One is a degraded partial. Female, consistent with a primary wearer. We'll need a familial reference sample, maybe from the brother Liam Jenkins, to be sure. But the second profile, it's a dominant full profile. Male. He's not in CODIS, but he's there, Maria. We have him. Karras hung up the phone, a profound, cold clarity settling over her. This wasn't a case about a runaway anymore. It wasn't about a mystery lover. This was a murder case, and the killer had left his signature. Her next call was to Liam Jenkins. He answered on the second ring, his voice wary, the default setting of a man who had only ever received bad news. "Mr. Jenkins," Karras said, her voice steady. "My name is Detective Maria Karras with the Oregon State Police Cold Case Unit. I'm calling you about your sister Sarah." There was a long silence on the other end. "What about her?" Liam finally said, his voice flat. "Mr. Jenkins, we're officially reopening her case. We found something. We found her locket." The sound that came through the phone was not a word, but a sharp, ragged intake of breath, the sound of a 42-year-old wound being torn open. The discovery of the locket and its hidden DNA profile transformed the Sarah Jenkins case from a historical tragedy into a high-priority, active investigation. Detective Karras assembled her team. She was the lead, the meticulous, organized center of the operation. She brought in Detective David Chen, a younger, tech-savvy investigator who specialized in a field that didn't exist in 1981, forensic genealogy, and, in an unorthodox move, she brought in Liam Jenkins. He was not a cop, but Karras recognized that his 42-year obsession made him the world's foremost expert on the case. He arrived at the OSP office in Salem, carrying a hard drive that contained his entire digital archive. He was gaunt, vibrating with a nervous energy that was almost painful to watch. "He was right there," Liam muttered to Karras, pointing to Owen McKinley's photo, which he'd pinned to their new whiteboard. "Alvarez said his story was wrong. The geography was wrong." "Right now, he's a witness, Liam," Karras cautioned, keeping her voice even. "The DNA doesn't match anyone in the system. We have to follow the evidence, not the theory." "Then follow the DNA," Chen interjected, tapping his keyboard. "The profile isn't in CODIS, which means our suspect has never been arrested for a felony, but it's a strong, clean profile. We have approval to run it through the genealogical databases." Chen uploaded the sequence. The team waited. The database, which compared the unknown DNA to samples uploaded by millions of everyday people searching for their relatives, began to spit out matches: third cousins, fourth cousins, great-great-aunts. It was a complex web of shared ancestry, a digital family tree. Chen worked for 2 days straight, building the tree backward and then forward, tracing lineages from the 1800s down to the present, looking for a common ancestor who would link all the matches. Finally, he isolated a family group. A large, well-established Oregon family that had settled in the Willamette Valley in the 1890s. The family name was McKinley. Liam looked at Karras, his eyes blazing. "Owen McKinley," he whispered. "He's part of that family. I've researched his genealogy. He's a direct descendant." "It's not proof," Karras said, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "It's a family. It could be his brother, his father, his cousin." "He had no brothers," Liam said instantly. "His father died in 78. His cousins live in Idaho. It's him." "We need his DNA, Liam. A direct sample. And we need to get it legally," Karras said. The atmosphere in the room was electric. After 42 years of silence, the case was suddenly hurtling toward a conclusion. They were no longer searching for a ghost in a 1981 newspaper clipping. They had a name, a face, and a genetic map that pointed directly to a pillar of the Pinecrest community. The team's focus narrowed, zeroing in on Owen "Red" McKinley. He was 75 years old now, a widower, living in a quiet retirement community in Pinecrest. He was, by all accounts, a beloved local figure. known for his volunteer work at the library and his charming, folksy demeanor. He was the picture of harmless old age. Karas and Chen began a low-key surveillance operation. They needed a touch DNA sample, something McKinley had discarded, which they could legally retrieve without a warrant. For 2 days, they watched him. They followed him to the grocery store, to the post office. He was meticulous, clean, and never drank coffee from a disposable cup. Finally, on the 3rd day, Chen, sitting in an unmarked car, watched McKinley check his mail. He pulled a handful of flyers and junk mail from his mailbox, sorted through it, and tossed the unwanted mail into his public recycling bin at the curb. As soon as McKinley went back inside, Chen, gloved, retrieved the discarded envelopes. One envelope, a sweepstakes offer, had a small, clear window. McKinley would have almost certainly touched the paper through the window to pull it out. Chen bagged it. They rushed the envelope to the lab. The technicians swabbed the edge of the plastic window. The next day, the call came. The DNA from the envelope was a perfect Ujata-1 match for the dominant male profile found inside Sarah Jenkins's locket. They had him. Karas, Chen, and Liam, accompanied by the now-retired Tom Alvarez, who had insisted on being there, drove to Owen McKinley's house. It was a sunny Tuesday afternoon. McKinley was in his front yard, kneeling on a foam pad, weeding his rose bushes. He looked up, smiling as the group approached. "Detective Karas," he said, recognizing her from a recent town hall meeting. "What a nice surprise." "Mr. McKinley," Karas said, her voice devoid of warmth, "we're here to talk about Sarah Jenkins." The smile vanished from McKinley's face. It didn't just fade, it evaporated as if a mask had been dropped. His face went slack grey. "Sarah," he stammered, I told the police everything I knew 40 years ago." "We know you did," Karas said. "We know you told them she was walking to meet someone. We know you lied." She held up a small plastic bag. Inside it, the tarnished silver locket rested on white cotton. "We found her locket, Owen, the one you pulled from her neck. Your DNA was inside the clasp." McKinley stared at the locket. His body began to tremble, a violent, rattling shudder. He collapsed sideways off his gardening pad, his hands sinking into the soft mulch of his perfect rose bed. "It came off," he whispered, the sound barely audible. "It came off on my watchband. I didn't know what to do." At the station, the confession came tumbling out, a 42-year-old poison finally released. Owen McKinley, frail and weeping, sat across from Karas and Liam, who watched from behind a two-way mirror. The story was simple, brutal, and utterly selfish. McKinley had been obsessed with Sarah. She was bright, beautiful, and represented all the potential he felt he'd lost in his own life. He saw her as a kind of perfect, unattainable prize. That night, he had attended the school board meeting. Afterward, he'd driven to the diner and waited. He saw her walk to her car. He pulled his truck alongside her, blocking her driver's side door. "I just wanted to talk," he said, his voice cracking. "I offered her a ride. She said no, politely. She said, 'I have to meet Debbie, Mr. McKinley.'" He insisted. He told her she was special and that he could help her in Portland. His tone shifted, becoming proprietary, unsettling. Sarah, smart and perceptive, recognized the danger. She told him to leave her alone, that he was creeping her out, and that she would tell his wife and the school principal. "She was going to ruin me," McKinley wept. "I had a family. I was respected. I just panicked." He reached out to stop her from walking away, grabbing the front of her shirt. She fought back, hard. He slammed her against the side of her own car. Her head struck the steel doorframe with a terrible flat sound. She went limp. It was that fast. He looked around. The lot was empty. In a blind panic, he put her in the bed of his truck, covered her with a tarp, and drove. He drove for miles up into the logging roads of the national forest, to a piece of land his family had once owned. He buried her there, in a shallow grave. He only noticed the locket, snagged on his watch, when he got home. He panicked again, drove back toward town, and threw it out the window in the dark, near the stretch of road where, by coincidence, Deputy Alvarez was conducting the Hendershot DUI arrest. His testimony to Gable, that he'd seen her walking to meet someone, was a brilliant, spontaneous piece of misdirection. It created a phantom suspect and painted Sarah as complicit in her own disappearance. He had watched the town grieve, had even comforted her friends at the high school, all while knowing he was the reason she was gone. Following the confession, Karras led a forensic team to the spot McKinley described. The land was now a housing development. They had to use ground-penetrating radar in the backyard of a suburban home. 2 feet down, they found the skeletal remains of Sarah Jenkins. After 42 years, she was found. The news of Owen McKinley's arrest sent a seismic shock through Pinecrest. This was not a drifter or a mystery man. This was Red McKinley, the man who had coached Little League, the man who served as the Grand Marshal in the 2005 town parade. The betrayal was absolute. The community was forced to reconcile the image of the kindly old man with the reality of a calculating murderer who had lived among them, free, for more than 4 decades. For Liam Jenkins, the discovery of his sister's remains was both a profound relief and a devastating end. The 42-year-old question of where was finally answered, but the finality was brutal. He stood at the excavation site, watching the forensic anthropologists carefully unearthing his sister, a silent scream trapped in his chest. Karras quietly handed him the locket, now evidence in a closed case. He closed his fist around it, the metal cold against his palm. He finally broke. The sobs of a 14-year-old boy erupting from a 56-year-old man. The news reached June Jenkins in her nursing home. Liam sat with her, holding her hand, trying to explain. The dementia had taken most of her short-term memory, but the name Sarah still registered. "We found her, Mom," Liam said, his voice thick. "We found Sarah." June looked at him, her eyes clouded, but a flicker of recognition passed through. She squeezed his hand. "My baby," she whispered. "She's home." It was unclear if she truly understood, but for Liam, it was enough. The town processed its grief and its shock. The Pinecrest Gazette ran a front-page retraction of its 1981 coverage, apologizing to the Jenkins family for ever implying Sarah was a runaway. The arrest and the discovery of the truth marked the end of a 42-year vigil. The ghost that had haunted the town was finally identified, and the community could begin to mourn the real Sarah, not the myth. The trial of Owen McKinley, held in the spring of 2024, was a formality. Faced with the DNA evidence and his own detailed confession, McKinley pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. The sentencing hearing was packed. The courtroom was silent, the air thick with the collective weight of 42 years of deferred justice. Liam Jenkins was the only person to give a victim impact statement. He did not yell. He did not cry. He stood at the podium, gripping the locket in his pocket, and spoke directly to the frail 75-year-old man in the defendant's box. "You didn't just kill my sister," Liam said, his voice clear and steady. "You killed my father, who died waiting for her to come home. You slowly erased my mother, who lived her life in a fog of grief. You stole my childhood. You took 42 years of what if from all of us." He paused, looking at the man who had been his high school guidance counselor. "When I was 14, I came to you for advice on what classes to take. You told me to focus on the future. You sat in your office, a respected man, while my sister was buried in the woods because of you. I hope you live long enough to feel even a fraction of the emptiness you forced on my family." Owen McKinley was sentenced to life in prison, with the judge noting that his betrayal of the community was second only to the brutality of his crime. He was transferred to the Oregon State Penitentiary, where he died of natural causes 6 months later, an anonymous, broken man. For Liam, justice was not a celebration. It was not a victory. It was simply the end of the noise. It was the closing of a file. It was the final heavy period at the end of a 42-year sentence. He walked out of the courtroom into the bright Oregon sunshine, and for the first time since he was 14 he felt quiet. The case was, at long last, closed. In the summer of 2024, Sarah Elizabeth Jenkins was finally laid to rest. A funeral service was held, 43 years after her death. The church was full. Debbie Carmichael, now a grandmother, spoke about her friend's bright laugh. Tom Alvarez, the retired deputy, served as a pallbearer. Liam Jenkins buried his sister in the Pinecrest Cemetery, in the plot between their mother and father, replacing the empty cenotaph with a real headstone. The inscription was simple: Sarah E. Jenkins, 1962-1981, daughter, sister, friend, finally home. Liam, his life's work completed, shut down his podcast and his website. He sold his apartment in Seattle and bought a small house on Maple Street in Pinecrest, just blocks from where he grew up. He reopened his private investigation business, but this time he specialized in helping his new community, not chasing its ghosts. The town, needing to heal, established the Sarah Jenkins Portland State Scholarship, funded by an anonymous donation from Liam. Every year, it is awarded to a female graduate of Pinecrest High School who, like Sarah, has a dream of seeing the world beyond the valley. Her legacy was no longer her disappearance, it was her future, finally given to someone else. The locket, her good luck charm, now sits on Liam's desk, no longer a clue to a crime, but a memory of a sister. A reminder that the truth, no matter how long it is buried, will eventually find its way to the light. Thank you for joining us for this investigation. The resolution of cases like Sarah's reminds us that no victim is ever truly forgotten, and that persistence is the most powerful tool in the fight for justice. If you believe a cold case in your community deserves another look, please share it in the comments below. And if you wish to see more stories of justice served, please like this video and subscribe to our channel.